One of the things that we found was we've kind of largely turned the corner on the global pandemic, and yet MeQ clients were telling us we hadn't turned the corner on things like spikes in clinical depression, clinical anxiety, burnout, loss of motivation, loss of engagement. And that's pretty interesting, right? Because as a psychologist, I know that usually when a big adversity ends, so does the psychological fallout. In this case, that's not happening. In fact, the psychological fallout is getting worse. And if you think about the 5 facets of a traumatic event, the pandemic checks each and every one of them. So for one, it's chronic and unrelenting. Now, if you go back to March of 2020, who would have thought that we'd still be in the midst of the pandemic at the end of 2020? And yet it's 2022 and we're still facing it. And it was pervasive in its impact. You know, lots of things have an impact on our lives, but this hit everything. Every facet of our life changed, and not for the better. And it was also 3, global in nature. There was no escape. You couldn't get on a plane and fly to Orlando and get away from it. It was everywhere. And we were really buffeted by these big events that were by and large outside of our control. We could mask up, we could isolate, we could do all of that, but our own individual actions were not going to stop the pandemic. And then finally, the 5th attribute of a traumatic event that really reaps that psychological harvest was that there was false hope. In March 2020, we thought we're going to get a vaccine really quickly. We didn't. We're going to get it out to people really quickly. We didn't. It's going to be a silver bullet. It wasn't. Now, that opens up a whole bunch of things. For one, there's a literature that shows us the law of thirds. So whenever a mass population goes through a mass trauma, the law of thirds applies. A third come out about the same as they went in. A third come out significantly weaker, impacted maybe for life in terms of psychological, emotional, mental, and even physical well-being. And a third come out stronger. And the fact is that the law of thirds is more of a guideline. It's more of a research finding, but there's absolutely no reason why we can't work in our organizations, with our teammates, in our own heads, and with our kids, if that's relevant, to help get 100% of people into that coming out better, stronger as we emerge from the pandemic.